Okay, want to give an update on the SpeedPro kinetic log splitter I picked up here, it was a few months ago, I think last fall actually. I got it mostly apart now. This one, for those that are familiar with it, is kind of one of the first, probably one of the first Chinese, at least I think it's Chinese log splitters that came through the pipeline here through I think Tractor Supply, SpeedPro. One of the things that this splitter has issues with is when you go to split some wood, sometimes if you get a piece that's doesn't want to split through the first time, instead of stalling out the flywheels, it will actually kick back through the handle, and I know I don't have any of that hooked up right now, so bear with me a little bit. The people that know a little bit about these are familiar with them, so so the handle will end up kicking back, and sometimes pretty violently, and pardon the mess, but I'm halfway through and I just want to document this one part. But anyway, this is actually a replacement rod that's a little bit thicker. The first one was like a 3/8 and then it came in a couple different pieces. Had a little wedge piece on there, I think, for a button, and I don't remember it all. I'll try and recollect what I can here, but bear with me if some of this is inaccurate. But so I replaced it with this solid one-piece half-inch rod, and you can see, well, it was straight to begin with, so that's that was bending when it would hit the log or hit the wouldn't try and split it. It would kick back and cause this to bend. So took it apart. The good news is, so far, the pinion is in good shape and the rack is in good shape. So these particular splitters had, I guess, at one time a rack upgrade option after people started breaking them or whatever. And I don't know if this one has it or not, and I have no way of telling. So maybe it just never broke the original. But there is, on the pinion, there is a couple teeth on there that are showing slight bending. So, and I don't know if that was from when it kicked back or just initially hit a hard piece of wood. So, so a couple things about this splitter that I've been reading about that people are suggesting is you want to slow them down, because they do seem to be pretty fast. I don't know all the specs on the speeds, but it's like 400 RPM on the, I believe there's two 70-pound flywheels, and people are saying that you should get that down to 300. Here's the engine that's on it, which I plan on actually upgrading to the diesel someday, but I got a HOTS 1B30 diesel. I just put some rings in, and I want to eventually get that over to here so I don't have to mess around with carburetors. It's not that I like diesel so much, but I just don't like carburetors, so try and swap those engines out when I can. But the pulley on here, and it's something I need to measure. This is like a 3 or 3.5 inch pulley, and at full speed that gets the 3600 RPM, I believe, gets that flywheels up to 400 or so. So easiest thing to do is slow the engine down, but then the clutch, I don't know enough. I haven't ran this enough to figure out everything, but if you slow it down too much, the clutch will probably burn on you. So ideally you'd have a smaller drive clutch and keep that engine RPM up. But anyway, getting away from the point of this here before I run out of batteries, which is always sooner than later. So I bent this rod, the violent kickback on the handle, which is normally up here, and I did do the conversion to switch it around, get rid of the button press. So that's something, if I ever get it back together again and run this, you'll actually see, and that's just basically people's ideas saw off the internet. So, but I haven't seen any so far that address this kickback issue, other than, well, some people are saying they aren't really getting that issue, and some people apparently are just living with it. I don't want to continue to live with it, because I'm afraid that if that is kicking back, it's point loading the pinion and the rack. And I'd rather take my chances installing the flywheels rather than point loading those, as it kicks back real hard. So we'll see. But anyway, so where are we today? We're to the point where I think I have a working locking mechanism on the engagement yoke. So this is the engagement yoke. I don't know if that's the proper name, but that seems to make sense. This is the factory piece here, and these are pieces I added on to lock it in place. So the idea, I don't even know how to start this so it makes sense, but essentially when this engagement yoke comes down, it's supposed to be right on the center line, or between the center lines of the pivot point and the pinion, or maybe even slightly forward or that. I don't know where this one's actually riding, but this is the stop for it, which I don't really like anymore. It's kind of what I consider to be now the weak point once I get into the rest of this. But this is the stop that prevents it from going down any farther. And then, of course, backwards, there's really nothing holding it from the factory. And so I did hook up the spring. I got most of it hooked up here. But essentially what I did, and I'm sorry, I'm probably skipping some steps here for people that are trying to understand this, but what I ended up doing is mounting two pieces of pipe with 1/2-inch bolts in them that you can, there's a nut welded on the back end of both of those, and then I had to weld them in. Unfortunately, I couldn't weld them underneath because I'm not a mirror welder, and I'm barely a regular welder, so hopefully this will hold up. But and then I drilled or used a couple hole saw holes in there just to let the nuts clear on that, because you really got to give yourself clearance for this rack in here. You can't stand those stops. You can't stand them off the frame, because then you'll be bumping it. You can see there's not a lot of clearance on the rack there, and that's got to move. And in fact, I'll show you later on, I had to actually bump this over a little bit to help with some of the things I'm working on. So anyway, that's the idea. These are going to act as adjustable stops, and being adjustable is a very key part of the whole thing, because you really want to get the clearance for those stops down. So getting back to the engagement yoke. So this is the engagement yoke with the 2 ball bearings on it. Incidentally, I did check the gap between the rack and the pinion, and it's about 25 thousandths. So I don't see any need to go up to bigger bearings. Some people said they went to a different size bearing, but I think they went from a 30 to a 35, which is 2.5 millimeters, which is more than 25 thousandths. So I don't want to take all the clearance out and have it binding because of that. But anyway, and I apologize if you guys aren't seeing this. The first time I ran the GoPro on my headband, so normally I just hold it, but I need both hands to show you this. But so this part's the factory part, which has your normal lever that comes into here. Sometimes that will shear that pin in there, and the same thing on top. Let's see, this normally connects onto there, and then it goes back through the top eventually. Maybe I'll show that in another video. But these are the parts I added, and all it is 2 1/2-inch bars that are connected onto the bottom of that engagement yoke, and the idea is this locks that engagement yoke in place, so it can't kick back. So so you can see the type of profile I ground on here. I just thought this would make sense. It has to this is going to end up pushing on both of these bolts right here. So you want a profile that kind of eases in there, but you don't want this completely round, because if it does start to press up, it could kick back out. And one other suggestion I did, I don't know if it's necessary or not, but this center line of this hole is slightly above where the bolt is going to be pressing, so it automatically, if it does start to bind, it wants to rotate clockwise, which makes it bind harder. So because the last thing you want this to do is kick out, then you're back to the same thing that you have. So that part really didn't seem that hard to come up with, but the to lock it in place, because it's just a normal jam rod, like things that end up getting you on day-to-day stuff that you don't want to jam, then this is what basically all that is, an implementation of that type of device. So, but the hard part is to figure out, that I struggle with the most, is how is this going to get released when it's at the end of the travel. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'll go ahead and put it in now. I used the only thing I changed was the bolt. I went and got another M10 10.9. I think that's a 10.9. Yeah, high grade, high strength bolt. Had to shorten it down a little bit. I actually cut a few threads on there with a die. All the parts I made, by the way, are just with normal tools. I don't have any mill or lathe. I'm hoping to get one at some point. Although that just brings more of these jobs into light. But get a lathe and a mill will help me make some of these parts. But I just used the cutoff wheel to take these 1/2-inch plates and contour them and make them fit around here. So anyway, so that bolt is different, and of course all of this, and then this is just a wire trip, and we'll get into that in a minute. This bolt that holds the engagement yokes is the stock one, and this goes together like this. Again, I apologize if my GoPro isn't showing all this, because I don't normally use it on my head. So, and this is a shoulder bolt, so you got to make sure it's in all the way. And right now I'm using this as a handle because I can't do it by hand, so I don't have the rest hooked up. So anyway, that's essentially how it goes together for where we are now. Of course, your flywheels are normally spinning this pinion, and then what happens is you go ahead and trip the handle, and it rolls into place. Okay, so it's locked right there, and you'll notice I can't even notice any play in there at all, and you can adjust that out. Again, going back to these bolts, if you can see them. You just adjust those out, and unfortunately they don't turn as nice as I'd like, so I had to use vice grips on them, but they still work. But you just essentially adjust them until it just lightly drags on there, and then you lock that nut in place on both sides. So in this configuration, there's not going to be any kickback happening, and I mean, if there is, then something's going to break, and I'm not thinking it's my stuff, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll find out, I guess, someday. So anyway, I got up to this point fairly quickly. One of the big things building this, like I said, you got to watch your clearance. You don't have a lot of real estate for this contraption in here, so that was one of the challenges. And this has to move freely. Okay, wasn't supposed to do that, but the point is, this is supposed to move freely. If that binds at all, which it may down the road, it won't go down. And if it doesn't go down, if it sits up like this, because that was happening too. I mean, normally you wouldn't have this here, so this would stay engaged by itself, or even without anything. So this isn't really doing anything until you get into that situation where it wants to kick back. But my point is that this has to move freely. I'm just using gravity for this right now. Maybe down the road I'll use springs if needed. I don't know. A lot of this is going to change when we get the motor on here. Things start shaking around, and I haven't gotten that far yet. So anyway, we can see that locks in. It's nice and tight, and it's not something that's just going to push out easily. So anyway, got to that point pretty easy, but then it's like, well, how am I going to trip this thing when it gets to the end? And that took a lot of time, and I'm not saying I have the best solution, but I have at least a solution, and that's with this basically mousetrap wire. And I see I installed it and got a little bent, but all this is, I mean, there's really nothing to it. It's just I drilled 2 holes in there's tabs on the side. I'll pull it back out because I forgot to talk about that part. And I'm trying not to bend that wire because when it bends, it doesn't work as good. So, welded 2 ears on those arms. I'm again sorry if it's going out of the camera. Welded 2 ears on there. Just drilled 2 holes and put that wire through. That's all that's holding that's all that's holding it on there. I was actually planning on something a little more robust than that, but after I got to thinking about it, there's some advantages to having that weak, because if something hangs up or whatever, I'd rather have that wire break than maybe something else. And even with 2 hands, I still can't do everything. Get that back in place there. Make sure the shoulder's on. Okay, so go ahead and put this back down. And now, see, in that case, it didn't lock, so I'm still having problems with this. And there's things binding in here, and that's going to be some of the nemesis to this system, and that's where springs may have to be implemented to put this in place. So that's actually kind of surprising, because I thought I was by that point. Should just go right in and lock down. And see, it's not doing that, and I don't know why. And that's just a matter of the friction that's in there. So as you can see, there's still going to be some bugs to work out. See, that time it went down. So I think I'm going to try and see, and it was actually stepped up there a little bit, and that's, you know, again, might have to go to springs. I'll just have to see. The good news, I think, is it doesn't, if it doesn't lock, it doesn't make it any worse than what it was. So that's where we're at. But we'll get into the point of showing you how this works in a minute. Getting back to tripping it. So when this normally runs, there's a and I got to use both hands for this. There's a little ramp at the end of this rack that causes the wheels to kick out. You can see it there. And when it runs past that rack, the engagement yoke actually falls down, and then the wheels ride on that ramp, and it kicks back when you want. That's when you want it to kick back, and then it releases, and then the ram comes back, gets retract. So nice simple way of getting that done. I really wanted to use the ramp. I just couldn't figure out a way to trip this off the ramp alone. So what I ended up doing was, instead of using the ramp, I just put a little bit of weld on there, and essentially just stuck the rod to it and cut it off, and just made like a little hook. I'm sure I could have did a little bit better job, but that hook is going to actually catch that wire and end up pulling that locking assembly up, so then it allows it to retract. So that's the purpose of that, and that's how you make it work. Again, I had to put this bolt in here to keep the rack over, because what happens is the rack has enough slop in it, or play, that it will actually, that little welded piece I put on there will actually run into the bearings and cause it to potentially bind up. So that mine likes to track to the right, so I just moved it over just a little bit so that this piece runs in between the bearings. And I apologize, again, I can't hold everything, but as this goes down, you can see that goes right between the wheels. And I still there's still a 1/4 inch or so play, but it has to be guided between there, otherwise runs into those bearings. So well, I don't know if I can shut the light off if you'll still see it or not, but let me set my flashlight down. Well, maybe I'll use a flashlight so you can see. So this comes up, catches that wire, and it's important for that wire to lay flat. And again, no springs in here. I might have to move to springs, but that little hook catches on that wire and then ends up tripping, and I'll show you. And the reason this will work, because normally you wouldn't have any force on this locking device. It would be all everything's pushing forward. If the log is split by the time it gets to the end, there shouldn't be any force on there. Now if there is, then that's going to cause another problem, and that's why I want the wire to break rather than putting on something there. It's going to cause some other problem. So, but we'll go ahead and trip it, and there it returns. So then it's ready for another cycle. Go ahead and put it down, and like I said, now here's another problem. This is the first time it did that. I see the wires catching on that square part. That's supposed to ride up over top of there, and I guess it did. Normally it does, and like I said, this I have to take a look at because it was playing nice and now it's not. And I may actually have the bolts just a little bit too snug yet. It's dragging just a little bit as it's going down, so I probably got to back those off just a little bit of a turn. I'm trying to take as much play out of here as I can. The other thing you'll notice, this is I was wondering what this block was for, because it essentially stops on these bumpers, and I was wondering why this block is in here, so I was going to cut it off. But really what that block does is helps, it actually, when you start the rack out, the wheels push up against that block and start the rack and forward, a forward motion, so that it's more easily engaged with the rack. So I thought, well, I better, before I cut that off, I better think of another plan. But what happens is when this rack retracts, you have to push this trip wire up. So I just welded a little ramp on there, and that seems to work. But now, as I showed you, there's other things catching. So I'll probably have to bend my rod here a little bit and get that. If I bend it in, that's one nice thing about having a piece of wire, is it's easily changed. So I'll just have to reform that so it rides up on that stop or that start block or whatever you want to call it. So again, we'll go ahead and cycle it one more time. And I feel bad now because it was working really good before, and now it isn't, which is not a surprise, I guess, for something like this. It was locking down every time, and now it's hanging up. So, and that's one thing I got to worry about down the road, is corrosion and rust causing this not to work. So it's got to be lubed up and maintained. So here we go, ready to trip one more time. Retracts, ready for the next cycle. I don't know if these things are supposed to have 2 springs. Mine only has 1, which seems to be fine. There's a setup for another spring on the other side. It's missing, so apparently either the person I bought it from got rid of it, or they never had them. So again, see now how nice it worked that time. It went down, it locked. The trip wire is behaving. It actually went over the start block, down the ramp. But again, getting repetibility over the years might be tough to do. There it goes again. See how nice that went down? Went down tight, locked, no play in there. Going for the next cycle. There, that's how it was working earlier, and I'm, again, why is it changing? I don't know. So I need some real life practice to get that to work. So that's as far as I've gone so far. I haven't tried running it with an engine yet. I don't imagine it'll be a lot different, a little bit faster, but it essentially should work the same. So some of the problems I'm going to have to worry about, like I said, vibration. Is vibration going to cause this to to lift up both the trip wire and even the engagement lock, the yoke lock. You know, is vibration going to affect that or not? I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, see, every time now it's working. I don't know what was going on there, but it just goes to show you that some of the stuff is not the easiest to implement. But it can be done. Now, from here, what do I need to do? I need to, okay, so we're running this and all of a sudden I hit a log and it stops. It's not going to kick out, I hope, because of the locking mechanism, but everything's going to come to a stop, and then what? So when I put it back together and get the handle back where it needs to be, I need to develop some linkage. I'm thinking from this plate here back up into the handle, and it'd be like a secondary. Where's my handle? Everything's in a mess here, so it's let's see, where's my handle? I don't know, it's running around here somewhere. Probably should have got that, I guess. No planning went into this video, so no cut scenes, because I'm not into cutting scenes. Handles can't be too far because I took it all apart. Oh, it's sitting right on top of the shroud. Yeah, this has to be attached to the shroud to reverse it, at least in my case. That's what I did. So what I kind of envision here, this will still be hooked up to the rod and still be hooked up to the yoke, just like it was from the factory. And then what I want to do, and I haven't thought much about this yet, but essentially put either another rod that works off this same pivot and comes down to here and makes that L shape. So when you'd actually squeeze it first into the main handle, this one, to pick it up, and that pivoting motion from here to here, if I can make it come out right, will give me about a 1/2 inch lift, which then should pick this up about a 1/2 inch, and this might trip. Hopefully not. Yeah. That'll pick that up manually, and then it'll allow it to come back. There. So not a lot changes there. Can still use the original engaging lever and rod once I straighten it. I'm trying to think if that will need to be slotted. I don't think so, because how this will work is this will essentially stay in one spot. You hit the bottom lever, it'll trip the latch, and then you can pick that up. In fact, you won't be able to actually lift this lever until you trip that the locker. So this will have to stay in place until you trip that. Now the problem is if you start applying a force to this handle before the other one trips, it might start binding. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I'll have to cross that bridge. But that's kind of what I'm planning on doing. That should be actually fairly simple to implement if I can use that same pivot point. I'll just have to figure out how that makes sense. That's tomorrow or next day's project. But at that point, I should have everything. I should have a manual trip if it gets stuck, and then it will have the automatic trip and the locking device. So there, once again, nice, engaged nice. I don't know why it wasn't doing that earlier. Seems to be somewhat repeatable. So I'll go ahead and record this in operation once I get it working. Again, my intent is to slow it down too. I don't want to. It's the last thing I want to do is grenade this thing after trying to get it to work better. Try and coax it along as much as I can. But it really should. It should take the blunt of the pulleys or the flywheels coming to a stop before it breaks something else. And there's, like I said, a lot of talk about the clutch over there, making sure it slips on the motor. And I don't know if I missed anything or not. Like I said, if you end up trying to build something like this, just make sure that the parts are moved as freely as possible. One other mistake I made when I welded these pieces of pipe onto the frame, and I ended up burning through, and that created a nice long delay because some of the weld puddle went down into the pipe, and then I couldn't get the threaded bolt through, so I had to clean that out. And of course, it's pretty hard to do when you can't shove a drill in it, so I ended up actually drilling a hole from the outside and going and cleaning it out that way. It was just one little drip of molten metal in there, and that's just enough to mess you up. So I took these out of here because I didn't want to weld the nuts inadvertently to the pipes. And if you look at it, there's like a step in here too, so if you put these stops in there, they're actually pressing up against the back, which really takes some load off the weld. The weld is just there to hold it in place, and like I said, I couldn't weld the bottom because I'm not that good of a welder, so I have to just get away with what's on top here, and I'm sure that should be fine. So like I said, now I worry about this stop in the front that prevents your engagement yoke from going forward. You know, if that, and I did take a light grind off of there because there's some casting, I don't know the official term, but some casting slag, I guess, I don't know, that was stuck up on there, and that was actually that little bit of slag or mold left over or whatever actually prevents that yoke from coming into slightly forward contact. So I mean, you may actually get away with just grinding this out on this machine and it presses up against here, but I'm afraid that if this starts to see a lot of force, that may snap this right out of here, because I think what I have set up, because it's in direct alignment with the bearings, is a lot stronger than this rod that's actually closer to the pivot point. Gives this a lot more force able to be applied on that rod than what I have in the back. So, but we'll see. I tried not to take too much off because I want the force to go towards the back now that I built this. So we'll see what happens. So sorry for the lengthy video. I tried to answer everything I could. I'm not going to go back and reshoot all this again. So this is kind of the last video on how that works. Are there things I could be better? I'm sure. Open to suggestions. People probably got a lot better ideas than I do. You know, a little more robust trip mechanism. This looks a little flimsy to me. The rest of it I'm happy with, as long as it's repeatable and as long as it's robust enough. But you got to put something that's adjustable in here, because if you just try and make it come out to where you think it's going to be tight, you're going to end up with a lot of slop in here, and then this might actually get too far off of that center line and break something easier than if it's in that tight alignment. So, and there is, I mean, there's a little bit in here. There's a few thousandths of clearance. There has to be to allow this to come up. So anyway, hope that helps you guys that may still use these yet. I don't know anymore. Is this worth fixing? It's arguable. It might be better off just, had I known that this had this issue to this extent, I'd probably not have bought this one, obviously, but I got it, so hate to just let it go to waste if it's something I can do to fix it, but it's probably a little more time wrapped up to it than I'd like to. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll try and get a video of it when it's back together. Once I get the handle working, I'll probably need another day worth of working on it and playing around. Again, thanks guys for watching, and I'll keep you updated.